Welcome back to Be a Better Leader. I'm Dr. AJ Lee, a manager of customer success and learning implementation strategist at Franklin Covey, the world's most trusted leadership company. Throughout this new season, we've been exploring strategies for effective leadership during times of change. Today, we want to focus on a key approach to creating a culture of open communication and transparency, especially crucial during periods of uncertainty. Joining us today is Barbara Cogburn, a Franklin Covey senior consultant with expertise in navigating difficult conversations and building trust. As a retired Marine and Iraq veteran, a former leadership trainer, facilitator, and coach for the Marine Corps, Navy, and other government entities and corporations, Barb has led extensive work to help others create strategic products and processes that facilitate a culture of behavior change. Barb, welcome to the show.
AJ, thanks so much. I'm excited to spend some time with you this afternoon.
Absolutely. Just reading your bio, it most certainly precedes you. And throughout your professional career, you've really been at the forefront of high stakes change, both in the field, leading and coaching leaders and teams through those challenges. Thinking about your experience working with organizations of all sizes, a diverse array of industries, why is it essential for leaders to create a culture of open communication and transparency?
It's interesting. The longer I have been in the business and the more I've been working, I think, with senior executive leaders too, the last couple of years, AJ, I keep coming back to this idea of we have to be so deliberate about creating relationships with people. So we create enough safety in relationships in a deliberate way where we can have open, candid conversations in both directions, where I can be candid with the people who work with me and they can come sit in my office and be candid with me, and there's safety. I don't know that we're great about that. And that's what allows people to come do their best work every day, is when they just feel safe with me. And I feel safe saying, hey, let's talk. That we need to do a little bit of tweaking on something. But I know if I give you a little bit of feedback, you're going to be able to make a change really quickly for me, right? And when you foster that kind of safety in a very deliberate way, think about what you can do and how the organization can show up and work together. And I think that's what we're missing, is creating that really deliberate step in organizations. So it's kind of an institutionalized behavior everywhere, right? And that's kind of what I see that people do not do in a very consistent way. So that's my take on it and what I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. That deliberate approach, right? Because it's so easy to just get in the flow of doing things as we've always done them, instead of slowing down enough to really create that safety keyword. I love that you said safety.
Yeah.
So when you think about safety and creating that environment through this open dialogue, what are some of the benefits or the things you've seen on the other side? Maybe a specific example that you've seen when a leader led with that open communication and created that culture of safety.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things too. I think, what I'm always interested in? I have this discussion so many times. I think this is so intriguing. Like, when we always have the benefit of all of our content, right? Like 7 habits and trust. And a lot of times when I'm teaching trust and we're talking about it, I'll say, how many of you have inherited someone who does not trust you? And everybody has had this experience. Do you know what I mean? Right? You have that. I always just think that's so intriguing when we go into an organization and we've inherited someone who's had a really bad experience. And if you can be really deliberate and thoughtful about how you create relationships right off the bat with people, think about the transformation you create for someone who's very guarded. It's coming to work not doing their best work because they're worried about their safety, protecting themselves. I've seen people be able to turn that around, where people were like, wait, this is a very different experience. This is not what I've had in the past. Where you can say, what was it like in the past for you? Well, how can it be different for us? Like, what could that be like? What would you like for it to be like? Are you able to meet me halfway where you couldn't do that before? And what got in the way before that I do not want to repeat. Tell me how not to repeat that, right? Like, I always think that's the most profound experience for people to turn this around, because it's like we've all had that experience with one person. And when you can do that for one person, just think about that. Like, that is huge. And it impacts everybody, because if one person just gets toxic, they spread everywhere. So I would just think that's my most intriguing thing, and I've seen it happen a million times. So you've seen it. I can see by your face.
Oh, absolutely. And who wouldn't want to be able to transform their reputation within the organization and be able to move those relationships in a more positive direction, right? And just with some of these simple, deliberate strategies, they can do that, which I think is super encouraging, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. So looking back, we had our first episode of the season, and we had our colleague Marche share some practical strategies to communicate in the midst of change in order to create buy-in. So in that specific scenario, we know that the communication doesn't end after it's announced to the field, right? This is happening.
Yeah.
But where does a leader start in communicating with their team? How can they start to ensure that their communication is both transparent and empathetic while still driving the change that needs to happen forward from your perspective?
Well, that's so interesting. You say, where do they start to? Because I just think this is a continual process. But all right, everybody, this is an over communicator you're listening to. So take that with a grain of salt, right? And I tell people, fair warning, I'm an over communicator, because I was always, as a military person, you're always having to explain something. So just tell me what's been going on so I can give a reasonable answer. I don't need to micromanage. I just need to know. So I think that my bias is really about having knowledge and communicating a lot so people feel informed. So I feel like I'm always on that cycle of where are we at? What are we talking about? And that people are just with me and where are we at in the cycle of communicating together, so we're not communicating. It's not a process I have to start. It's just part of what we do. And again, I think that comes back to being deliberate and what do I want to do? And that's me. We always say leaders create culture. That's part of the culture I want on my team. We're always talking about where we're going, and hopefully my team's talking about it. Barb, here's what we need to do next. Good. Thank you. Keep being fabulous. Now, what else do we need to know, and what else do we need to do? And so I hope that we are just kind of guiding them along. Hopefully I've got the map and I'm driving the bus, but they're the engine, right? That's the way I think about this. But I think, too, we need to be purposeful, have intent, be deliberate, have these conversations. And definitely during change, there's some very specific things I want to do. And I think Marche is right about that. You don't just start the change, kick it off. I'm looking for where people are getting stuck, where there's some real emotion showing up. Is there anything I need to just be paying attention to? Because change is so fraught with failure. Like Debbie Downer all of a sudden, whoops, okay, sorry about that. But that's what I'm looking for, because I know from that experience that it can kind of go off the rails. So at that point, hopefully I'm paying attention and making sure my team is having conversations about that. Hopefully that's, a little bit to add to what Marche brought to the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And I love just that shift in mindset from, I described it as, where does a leader start, right? And you mentioned, no, it's a continuum. Yeah. The leader should be approaching the ebbs and flows of the business as a continuum that really never stops. Change is inherent. It is consistent. It is can be predicted to an extent, but there's also an unpredictability to it. So yes. I just thought that was a really profound point. Absolutely. So for those that are navigating the change and they're in the midst of this experience, what happens when they face some resistance from their teams? And maybe it's that one team member that just has a certain opinion about everything that you want to bring to the table. Oftentimes we might err on the side of just waiting in silence to see if they get on the bus, right? Like you said, but how would a leader be able to approach that conversation with curiosity and deliberate, intention in order to actually be open to seeing what's on the other side and bring that team member along with them? What strategies do you have for that?
I love that you brought up, that was part of my notes, AJ. That was so good. I think that's a big component of it as a leader, that I have to go into this with some curiosity, because that's where I get in trouble if I have a preconceived notion. Oh, this person may be difficult. They've been here. I've heard about them. I gotta let that go for a little bit, because who knows what drives people. I mean, it just could be all kinds of things. I think too, one of the things we have to remember, that when people get stuck, we have so much change going on in organizations right now. It's not one change, it's many, and it's almost every organization I've ever worked with is in a constant change cycle. So the fact that people are getting stuck should not be a surprise to us. It should probably be a norm, right? Because it's challenging and it's tiring and it wears people out. So when you say bring curiosity to this, that's probably the first thing we need to do. What's going on? What's happening? I sometimes think about this too, of going back to, Marche's expertise in change. Where do they show up in their initial reaction to change? I always think about how they do that, and start there, get a little bit curious. Are they back in that place again? Are they not a mover? They are a waiter, and they went, oh, I just need to wait for a minute because I'm tired and I just need to hunker down and get some space. And then just be curious, see what's going on, and don't make an assumption right away. And don't judge. Let them have some space, because we do beat people up with change just because of the sheer volume of it all the time. In fact, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day, and I was talking about they were doing so much change. I said, when's the last time you guys stopped, had a break, and celebrated because they had a really great success and they were already on to something else? And he said, oh, we didn't celebrate anything. I said, you've got to have some kind of demarcation for people to go, yes, we're done with one thing, now we can move on. My brain wants to go, oh, thank goodness, or else I never know when one thing ends and one thing begins, right? So I think that's why this, be curious, give people some grace, see what's really going on, because we do just kind of just beat them up with change so much. And then once you figure things out, I sometimes don't feel the need to make a change right away. I literally will go into coaching mode and go, now that we're talking about it, what do you think you can do differently? And put ownership on people. Let them think about it. You've acknowledged that they're struggling, and say, what do you want to do differently? Because this is part of our professional credibility, our ability to handle change. And I want them to thrive, and let them think about it for a little while. Come back and check in on them, and then see where you go. But don't be in an absolutely huge hurry unless you have to. Let them have some space to think. I mean, I'm talking overnight. Listen, I'm not giving them, a week. Listen to Barb. I'm like, you only get a day. That's it. 24 hours, people. That's all I got. But, just think about it and see where you land, and tell me what you want to do next. And that was probably too long, but I guess if we recapped it, it's be curious, see where they're at, give them some space, not too much judgment. Now, where are you at with this, and what can you do differently? Space if needed, come back and get some accountability.
Oh my goodness. That is so good. So good. Because I think on the back end of that, right, something, you mentioned celebrating the wins, but on the back end of that communication, just experience, putting it back on them and approaching, giving them the choice to come back to the table with their thoughts and their reflections from that conversation. That's honestly something that I've seen happen in practice very well, but I think most leaders don't consider that. I think most leaders feel like they feel the pressure from the top, and they feel the responsibility to continue to push and execute as fast as they can. So you mentioned those great techniques to slow down and encourage that conversation to continue forward. Is there anything else that you would recommend when fostering that collective dialogue with the individual or with the collective team that might help them continue to keep everything? You said just 24 hours, not too long, right? We don't want to belabor the change. We want to encourage them to go forward. But any other techniques that you've used to encourage just that dialogue?
I'm going to kind of back up a little bit from what you said too, a little bit about letting people, make their own choice. There's this thing that when we started teaching change, I just remember somebody telling me, when change is my idea, it is awesome. It is such a great idea. But man, when it's your idea, it's like, not so much, right? And when, the way you said that made me think of that quote. So allowing people to kind of help themselves through their own struggle and their transition. It allows them to have some autonomy, right? And some control over this, where sometimes we don't have all that control. I think that's some of the open communication and the technique of doing this when teams are getting stuck. Where are we at? How does it really feel? And I was listening to Marche again, like I said, on some of these past things that she talked about, and she was talking about this just heavy dose of empathy with people when they're in this, change cycle and when we're communicating with them. And most of the time, the people who work for me, I hired them to critically think. And so I want to put them to work and let them critically think. They know the answer. And sometimes we just need to support them and go, you're right, that's exactly what we need to do. So what is it going to look like? And how do I get you there? And what's the first step and where do we go from here? So I think, again, remember, we are leaders. We don't have to make every decision. We just have to guide, check in, help steer people where they need to go, and not always be so heavy-handed, because that's why we hired these people to do great work for us and make things happen. So sometimes it's that need to just step back just a little bit and let them do what they do well.
Barb, I feel like that's the mic drop moment at the end, right? Creating a culture of open transparency starts with us allowing them the autonomy to do the jobs we've hired them to do.
Yeah.
It starts with us having those open discussions, those curious discussions, inviting them to think critically about how they want to own their navigation through those changes. That's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Thank you.
Oh, well, Barb, thank you so much just for this time. I know we're going to be able to have you back on some future episodes as well. So I really appreciate these insights shared with the team.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed just spending some time today, AJ. It was great. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. And for listeners who want to learn more about their communication style as they prepare to have a difficult conversation, you can download our free difficult conversation assessment tool. The link is right here in the show notes, or you can visit franklincovey.com for additional resources and information on how to create a more transparent and communicative workplace. Till next time.